Hi everyone, my name's Alec. I've been wargaming for about 50 years. I've just bought a new set of rules. There we go, Muskets and Tomahawks. I got them about a week ago. Well, in fact, just before this terrible coronavirus broke. So I haven't been able to play them down the club. My local club is Farnborough Wargames Club. Two or three of us bought these rules there, and we haven't been able to play them yet, and it's going to be some time before we do. So as I'm stuck at home and I've got plenty of time on my hands, I'm going to learn to play these rules. So here they are. They come in two parts, the rules. The actual rule book themselves, which cover a lot of periods in actual fact. You'll see by the various photographs in the book that they're going to be covering several periods that aren't included in the first supplement, which is this one here. Now, the Redcoats and Tomahawks first supplement covers the French and Indian Wars, as you can see there, the American War of Independence, and the War of 1812. And in the supplements are the army lists that you can use for those periods. There's the British troops. You'll see there the three different periods you can use these. The British can be used in all three. But for each army troop type, if I turn over the page, for example here, the British Dragoons, you can only use those in the War of Independence and the War of 1812, not in the French and Indian Wars. So there's a good example of the sort of troops that you can have on the British side. For example, you can have, let's turn back, the basic British infantry. You can start with 8 figures, you can have up to 4 extras, and they can have some options as well, which I'll go through in a minute, what I'm going to be using from these lists. There will be other supplements coming out to cover different periods, Napoleonic Wars. I noticed there's some pictures of the Napoleonic Wars in the books, and there's also some sort of British in India and Zulus as well. So I think they'll do everything through sort of the 17 and 1800s periods, the black powder period. Now the game I'm going to be doing is from one of the scenarios from the main book. There are 3 generic scenarios. There's the morning meeting, which is this one here, the ambush, and if you look over the page, the breakthrough. And these can be done in any of the periods. You do get other scenarios in each of the supplements, but I've just stuck to one of these 3. And I rolled a dice. In fact, the one that came up was the ambush scenario. So that's the game I'm going to be doing today. Now, I haven't used these rules before, and in fact I never used the first version of Muskets and Tomahawks. So a lot of you guys would probably know better than me how it all works out. I do like skirmish rules, and in fact I don't have a French and Indian Wars or 1812 armies, but I have loads of troops from the American War of Independence, so that's why I'm doing that period. I use these troops for the Osprey Rebels and Patriots rules, which are, and I think they're a nice set of rules. They're quite straightforward, very simple. Some people say they're too simple, but I quite like them. If you want a nice, easy, quick game to put together, I use those. I also use them for sharp practice, which are the opposite end of the scale. They're a bit more complex. There's a few things I don't like about them, but they are very popular, and I've used them for the last few years. But I've heard good things about the first version of Muskets and Tomahawks. Although I never played them myself, I decided, and 2 or 3 members of the club decided, we would all have a go. Until we ordered them up and they've arrived, and to say we're itching to have a go but haven't done so yet. Now I don't know about you, but I find when you get a new set of rules, you read them, it doesn't make any sense at all. It goes straight over the top of my head. It's probably an age thing. So the only way really to learn a new set of rules, quite frankly, is to have a go and play a game. Ideally against somebody. Can't do that, so I'm having a solo game. Right, so I mentioned the first scenario I'm going to be doing is the ambush scenario. And just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing, why you're understanding what I'm doing, I'll explain roughly what that is. The terrain has been put out. The side that has the most figures is the attacker, and in a minute you'll see that it's clearly the American side. The defender chooses two corners on the table as his withdrawal points. Now, as the British are coming on over here on the west, they're going to have to try and get off the table down the other end there, the northeast corner or the southeast corner. That's what they're going to try and do. They've got two deployment points, which you can see here on the edge of the table, and that's where their troops are put within 6 inches of the deployment points. I'll go through the army or the figures I'm using in a minute. The attacker then has 4 deployment points, and as you can see, one up there, 2 on the eastern border and 1 down here. And his troops are also then deployed within 6 inches of those points. Right, so then the game is, the idea is the British have got some plunder. See those little green things there? That's it. Well, they're plunder. They're trying to take those off those 2 top right, the right hand corner over there, or this bottom right hand one here. And the Americans have got to try and stop them and try and capture the plunder. So if the British manage to get the plunder off the tables, they win. Right, so that's the basic table. Now the troops that I'm using, I'll try and zoom in here on the sheet that I'm going to be using. There's quite a few options you can do. I've actually kept it fairly straightforward today because it's my first game. So I've got an officer, I've got 2 units of British infantry, as you can see there and there, and I've got a unit of light infantry that are just about to go through the woods. So that's the British side. And on the American side, I've got 2 units over here of militia, and then we've got 2 units coming in on the east of the provincial troops, slightly better quality, and I've got a unit here of skirmishers armed with a long rifle. Right, so on the British side, I've deployed where I think is the best place to be. You've got to be within 6 inches of deployment points, so I'm sort of hedging my bets here as to whether I go sort of south along here with this unit and the other 2 through the northern valley, or to send everybody that way, or in fact come south. So I'm hedging my bets really. The Americans haven't seen my deployment. I've decided to cover every eventuality. This is a very strong unit with the long rifles. They will be able to cause serious damage from a long range. And also you'll see behind them they've got some rocky ground, so that might be a useful place for them to go and sit. And they're going to be very difficult to dislodge from there, I think. The Continental troops, or the provincials, are going to cover the centre, and if they get to this position here, they should be able to cover whichever way the British start to come. And the militia, who are not that powerful, I don't think, I'm not sure how they're going to work out. You've got 1 unit in a swamp area here that gives them a little bit of light cover, and this unit, the idea is to get that unit into this wood if I can, which will make them difficult to dislodge as well. So that's where we are. The Americans make the first move. So we'll do that in a minute. Now, if your game is card based, and as you can see from the layout here, the Americans have got a lot more cards than the British. The reason is that, for example, the British are in fact all regulars. So they can have this regular card, they get 4 of those cards, and every time they draw one of those cards, all of those regulars can do something. They can move, or they can shoot, or they can rally, or they can load. On the American side, because they've got 3 different troop types, provincials, militia and irregulars, they get all of those cards. So you've only got to have 1 unit, for example, of skirmishers, and they can have the irregular or the irregular cards. And obviously they can also have the militia cards for these guys, and they can have the provincial card, well, for their provincials. So they've got a lot more cards to use than the British. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Right, now each player then draws 3 cards from the pack. You'll see this is what the British have drawn, but you'll notice here they've got a clock card that can be discarded, and they can take another card from the pack. So that's the British cards. But it's the Americans that go first. Now, as it happens, they've got a provincial card, a militia card, and a morale. In fact, the morale is going to be pretty useless early on, and that becomes more important later on in the game. But the Americans first go, so they can elect which to use. And let's say they want to use they want to get their militia. They want to move their militia because it's important to get these guys here, especially, into this wood. So that's the first move that I'm going to do. And all we do with that is both units can move. The militia, they only move 4 inches. So here we go. Let's get those moving across to that wood as quick as they can. The other guys in the wood here, there is no reason why they can't move over here a little bit. The move is reduced in that swamp. So let's put them, there we are, they're going to move about there. There you go, 3 inches. So they're moving forward. They've only got a 24-inch range, which is why they didn't shoot. So that is it. That card has now been used, and it is discarded. And that's the first move. The Americans can't do anything else. It's up to the British to move now. So let's look at what cards the British have got. Well, they've got a regulars card, a forward boys card, and a blue irregulars card. So the options are here is to move all my force with the regulars. I can move all 3 units, including my officer, which I might well decide to do. Or I can do the forward boys, which activates my officer, and then he can also give an order to a unit within 6 inches to move. But as I need to move up, I might leave that one a bit. Now I could use this blue card. The trouble is, if I use that, it's not me that moves, it's the American side. So if I place that card and activate the American irregulars, which are these guys down here, then the American guy gets to move. Which you may think, well, why would you want to do that? Well, you've got to use that card at some point. And if you do that, you gain a command ability, which is one of these little green discs. And that command ability I'll explain later when I've got enough of them, but that's an extra thing that you can do instead of using one of these cards. You actually do start off with one already. So if I use this card, I actually will gain another command point. But I'm not going to do that yet. I'm not in any hurry. I'm going to leave the command point I've got there because I get one anyway for free for my officer. But the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move my 3 units of regulars. At the beginning of the game, light troops can choose to either have the scout trait or the close order trait. I've decided to go with the scout trait, which means they move an inch quicker than normal troops. They move 5 inches instead of 4 inches. They also don't suffer a -1 penalty for going through rough ground, which is what that wood is. So they'll still go through there at 5 inches, whereas normal infantry would have to go through it just instead of 4 inches, they'll be going at 3 inches. So it's quite useful, I think, to have them as graded as scouts. I've made my first move, and as you can see, the light infantry are going through the woods, and the other infantry have done their 4-inch move forwards, facing now the pretty scared militia. So having done that, I then have to discard my card because the regulars have moved. And I don't draw another one yet. I have to wait until I've used all these 3 cards before I can draw another 3 cards from the deck, which is here. I also just realised I haven't moved my officer, so I better move him pretty quick. There you go. Right, so that's the first move done. No shooting, obviously, because they can only do one thing, and all the British regulars have moved. Now, it's the American turn. So what are they going to do? They can move their provincials up, which are these guys here. Or they can play this morale card, which is a bit of a waste of time anyway, because it won't do anything. Right, so I think we'll have to move the provincials up. So let's do that now. So there we go, the provincials and the officer, he's a provincial officer as well. They've all moved 4 inches forward. Now it's back to the Brits to go. Right, so they've got forward boys or the irregulars card. So I think we're going to do the forward boys card. This means this officer can give an order to one of these units to do something. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to get this unit to open fire. Now this unit, when it fires, there's a couple of ways it can fire. In fact, it's got muskets which have got a 24-inch range. So you can measure to the nearest unit. It's 14 inches, so they're well in range for a musket. In fact, yeah, that's the range. They do go a long way. But because it's over 12 inches, this unit usually shoots to hit at a rate of 6+. So on a D10 dice, it has to score 6, 7, 8 or 9. Incidentally, yes, you do need D10s. Most rules use D6s, but in these set of rules it's D10s you need. And remember that the 0, which most people used to count as a 10, isn't. In fact, it's a 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. There is no 10. So this unit, if it shoots, will be hitting normally on 6+, so 6, 7, 8 and 9. But if it should shoot at that unit, it's more than 12 inches away, it loses 1. So it'll only be hitting on 7, 8 and 9. So it's still got a pretty good chance. The other thing is that when you shoot, if you shoot the entire unit, you have to put one of these fire markers down. Oh, that's the French version. Turn it around, fire. That would normally be placed here, which means next turn it has to load. If you decide to only fire half the unit, you don't have to put a fire marker down. So I could fire 5 men out of the 10 instead. But then next move I could fire another 5. So it's up to you whether you fire the whole unit or just half the unit. Now the other thing this unit can do, because it's in actually a close order formation, which you are allowed to go into close order formation. Either during the game you can do half a move and go into close order formation, or you can start the game in that formation, which I did, which is why they're on movement bases. That denotes that they're in close order. And in close order formation they can do what's known as volley fire, and volley fire has a range of 16 inches, which is, there we are, they're well in range, that unit. And rather than hit on sevens, the defenders, everyone that's within that 16-inch range, and let me have a look how many there are. Let me just count up. Well, those end to a knot, so we've got 8 figures that are within range of that unit. So what you then do is you roll 8 dice, and you're hitting. Normally if you roll a 0, it's a hit. If the firing unit is formed into a line with 2 ranks, each target must deduct 1 from their die roll. So basically they'll be hitting on 0s and 1s. So if I roll 8 dice, all 0s and 1s are hit. And the interesting thing is there's no saves. So this volley fire can be very effective. So let's see what happens. Well, the first 4 dice, I've got a 1 and a 0. I'm going to roll another 4 because I don't have 8 dice. Funnily enough. In fact, yeah, 8 dice. I did 8, didn't I? Yes, I did, 8. But all the other 4 missed. So this unit over here has now taken 2 casualties. I'll take the nearest 2 off. So quite effective really, even from that range. There seems to be no deduction for range if they're within 16 inches, and even if they're in light cover, you don't get any cover either. So volley fire can be very, very useful, very effective. So it's worth going into that formation for. There are a few negatives about being in that formation, but more about that later. So that unit now must test for morale. So let me just roll a dice and see what they roll. Oh, truth. Right, okay, that's interesting. They rolled a 0, which is not a very good start. Now I'm just going to go through the quick reference sheet and work out what that means, and I've got a feeling they're not going to like it. So here, if you can see that, this is what I have to go down these details here. This is the reaction test. This is for all reaction tests, is the top box, and the second box is just for shooting. We won't have to do the bottom box because that's for melee, and then we have to look along here as to what happened. So let me just read out what's happened here. They rolled a 0. So the unit is an officer and has at least one officer within 6 inches. Well, it hasn't, so it gets no bonus there. It does comprise though of, it says 6 or 10 figures. Well, there's only 8 there now, so they get a +1 for that. So they're 1 up at the moment. That's good. There's no bonus for being formed up. The British would have a bonus for being formed up. You see, they'd get a +2 for that, but these militia haven't. And the unit is not an officer, but comprises of 3 figures or less. Not that. It hasn't got the native trait. Right, so if we look on here, this is the one, look, they're on this here, they're under 0. So if you go all the way along here to here, they rout. Oh dear. So the very first shot of the game, by sheer fluke, they rolled a terrible morale dice, or 0, the worst possible thing they could roll on a D10, and they've gone. So that's an amazing start. But that is wargaming, isn't it? So they tried to get in that wood. They got caught in open ground of volley fire from British regulars. They lost 2 men and decided, that's enough for me, I'm off. So they've disappeared. So would you believe it? There we go. As I say, that's wargaming, isn't it? Just one of those things. Very, very unlucky indeed to get that. They only needed the different things that could have happened there. I mean, they might have had no effect if they'd, you know, rolled 8, 9 or 10 or something like, or 8 or 9, they would have been all right. If they'd ended up on 7, they would have recoiled, which is not a big problem. Just go back 4 inches. If they had recoiled and shaken, they would have gone back and they would have been shaken as well. But again, that wouldn't have been a disaster. They just would have had to spend next move getting out and removing that shaken. They might have had taken flight again. They just go back a bit further and with their backs to the enemy. So again, they can be saved from that. But they got rout, which was very unfortunate indeed. So there we go. So that's the British turn, a very good British turn, I hasten to add. And now it's the American turn. And the only card they've got now is this morale thing. Well, there's not, they can't use that. I'll explain that later on when, well, basically it's, let's have a look. Let's read it out. Just as we're on that now, we might as well have a look. Right, so if you use the morale card, if the force of the Cards Association faction has lost at least half their troops, well, they haven't, so we won't go down that route. They haven't lost half their troops. If they had, in fact, it's quite simple. If the army's lost half its figures, all the units on the table have to do a morale test. That's that one. Otherwise, the player playing the card chooses a unit containing 3 figures or less. Well, there aren't any on the table with 3 figures or less anyway. And it should have also suffered at least 1 casualty. And then that would have to do a reaction test as well. So there's nothing going to happen with that card. It's really just a wasted card. It's put into over here, into the discard pile. And you'll notice that the American now hasn't got any cards. So he can draw 3 more. Let's draw them, see what they are. He's got a blue card for irregulars. He's got a provincial card, and he's got the clock card. Now, whilst we're on that, the clock cards, there's 2 green and 1 red. If the very first one that's drawn out the pack is a red card, then you do what's known as, hang on, I'll get the list out. You do a random event. And in the back of the book of the supplement for this period, there you go, there's random events. So if that should happen, for example, you roll a d10, and let's just say, for example, you rolled a 3, so you'd be on this section here, and then if you rolled a 4 or a 5, what would happen is terror and adversity sometimes gives fighters a second wind. So starting with the player who drew the red card, each player chooses a troop card from the discard pile to shuffle into the deck. So they can choose a card they obviously want to use again, and it goes back from the discard pile back into the main deck. So that's what happens if that card had been drawn out first of all. But in fact, we'd already drawn a green card, a clock card, so that just goes on there like that. Once you've drawn 3 clock cards, then you reshuffle the discard pack and what's left in here and put those cards back in. You reshuffle the whole lot. You do keep the cards that you've got on the table. Having drawn the clock card, then you put it on the pile over there and you draw another card. In fact, they draw a morale card. So that's the Americans' turn over. We're going to go back to the British turn, and they've only got 1 card left, which is the irregulars one. So the trouble is, it's a blue card, so they have to play it. They have no option, but for that they do get another command point, which goes on their pile. But it now means the Americans can move their irregular unit, which is this unit down here. So what are they going to do? Well, they are actually in range of these British troops passing by the wood. So I think they should have a pop at them, don't you? They're actually just within 24 inches. So it's worth having a pop at them to see whether they can cause any casualties. So can this unit of skirmishers see this unit? Well, there's nothing blocking the sight. That's not actually in the way. And you'll see from the table that units have got a 96-inch range for spotting, which is huge. But of course you do get reductions. For example, if this unit was in this wood or behind it, you would be a -4, so the columns, it would go down from 96 to 18 inches, so then it wouldn't actually be able to see that unit if it was in that wood. But it isn't. There's, from what I can see on the columns, in fact this has the scouting trait, so it gets a +1, so it's got a 120-inch range. And the terrain is not doing anything. No, there was no reason why that unit can't spot that unit. It's pretty obvious. Obviously over here that wouldn't be able to see them. That would. It's pretty obvious really. So this unit of skirmishers is going to open fire on the British here. So the skirmishers hit on 5+, so it's got quite a good rate, but it is firing at long range, which it loses -1 for that range. And then just make sure there's nothing else. In fact, it's if this is this would be dense cover, and the cover applies for units that are either in it or it crosses at least 3 inches of cover, then it would still count. So if it was here, if that was less than 3 inches on that edge of that wood, it wouldn't count. No, there's no other minuses, so it's going to hit, instead of, as I mentioned before, it normally hits on 5s, it's going to hit on 6s. Now I'm only going to shoot half the unit, because if I shoot all 6, it will have to reload. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to roll the dices. We've got a 6, a 5 and a 4. However, I've just double checked, and the long rifles get a +1 for shooting. That's because they are very good at sniping at long range. So in fact it goes back to 5. So it's actually got 2 hits on the British infantry, which is rather good out of 3 really. Now it's got a strength. The strength varies depending on whether it's under 12 inches or not. It's over 12 inches. It's got a strength of 5. So now the defender has to see whether he's managed to, well, whether the bullets actually hit home. So 5s and above is a hit, and they both are above. So it's 2 hits. So the British infantry take 2 casualties. Now that was pretty good shooting from that range. You can see why that unit is so good. It's got a very long range, and we can actually do quite a bit of damage. It does actually, though, still receive 1 fire token, because it would normally have 2, because long rifles take a long time to reload. And by firing only half the men, it only gets 1 token. So here we are. After each shooting action, place 2 fire markers next to the unit instead of just 1. The long rifle therefore needs 2 loading actions to be able to be used again. If the unit fired less than half its numbers, then you still have to place 1 fire marker. In fact, I think there's no point in firing just 1. They might as well fire all 6. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to roll 3 more dice. Only get 1 more hit. Let's see whether it hit home. No, it didn't. So that was a bit of a waste of time. So I've got 2 fire markers down now for that unit. It's going to take 2 moves to reload, but it has managed to kill off 2 British infantry. They've now got to do a test. Would you believe it? I rolled another 0. I can't believe that. So let's see what happens to this poor British unit that didn't like that at all. Let's have a look. Right, there is an officer within 6 inches, so it gains 1 for that. It's comprised of at least 6 figures, so it gains another 1 for that. There's 2 up at the moment. Now it is formed up as well. It's in close formation, so it gets 2 for that. So that's 4 plus 4 at the moment. See what other things are on there. There's no cover, no volley fire. It didn't cover. It didn't lose 3 casualties, which would have been -2, but it didn't. So it rolled 0, but it's got 4 back. It's got +4 to come on to that, which is very useful. So if you look on the table here, it's 4 and it's trained. So although it rolled the same dice as the Militia, it's got a lot more bonuses. And in fact, what happens to it, it says it's recoils or shaken, and it's my choice. So I'm going to make them shaken. So if I put a little shaken token next to them, and that's it. That's that move done. So let's recap on that very first move. The British have moved forward. They've opened fire with this unit here, or volley fire, and made the poor Militia run off the battlefield. They're on the edge of the battlefield there, but they're effectively gone. And then these skirmishers opened fires on British here, and has caused them to become shaken, and they've lost 2 men. So I wouldn't say honours even exactly, because losing a Militia unit has been pretty bad news for the poor Americans and the very first move. But there we go. So that's the first move completed. Incidentally, I've pulled out 3 new cards for the British. Now you'll notice they've got 2 blue ones and only 1 red, which means although they can move when it is their turn, which will be in a minute, they can use this. If they use the blue cards to activate the enemy Militia or their provincials, they will gain another token here, another token, but I'm afraid that's just how the way the cards come out. There are more blue cards in the pack than there are red, which is the disadvantage to the British. However, the one advantage the British do have is when they do play a regular card, they can move all of their 3 units and their officer. So it swings and roundabouts, really. Right, I've done the next move. The Americans moved their provincial units. They wanted to make sure they moved up the battlefield, so they've just moved up. They've just done a move each. And then over on the British side, you'll notice that I've removed 1 fire marker from here. That's their turn. I've removed the smoke as well, because once the smoke's removed, once the unit is activated a second time, smoke purely makes it easier to be spotted. It's these fire tokens that are the loading ones. And then this unit here, which was shaken, I managed to roll a decent morale dice. And as long as they get more than their rally value, which is 5 for regulars, they rolled a 7. So they were able to immediately rally and move forward. I could have fired on this unit over here, and I was tempted to, but I was a bit worried that these guys here could fire again on them soon and cause more casualties. So I've just moved them behind that wood, so they now can't be seen, and it does mean that they can hopefully shoot next time and cause a bit of a problem to those over there. They're still in the formation they started. They're still in close order formation. The other thing is, in the woods you can see I moved the light infantry up. They can't shoot as well, they just can move, which they've done. So these Militia here, although they're in a sort of a swamp area, they do get some sort of light cover. They're not looking very happy really with this, because they got 3 British units quite close to them, 2 of which are aiming right at them. So how long they'll stay there, I don't know. Right, next move. Okay, it's the British move. The Americans have just moved, and by reloading these irregulars here. And now it's the British go. Now the British have got a bit of a dilemma here, because they've only got 2 blue cards. So they must use one of those, or they haven't got enough points here to use these command points. They need really, for what they want to do, they need 3. So they're going to have to use one of these blue cards. They're either going to let the provincials move, which are these over here, which they probably don't want, or the militia card, which would mean these would get activated. So since they really have no option, that's the one they'll do. And they will gain another point here for their command points. So the militia are going to move. The options are, they can shoot at this unit in the woods, but it's not a very good target. The reason is because they'll get cover for being in a dense wood. Okay, so that's -2. They only shoot at 7 anyway, so that means they're on 9. And in addition to that, these are in open order, or they're in extended order, which means they lose another 1. So they'd be hitting on 10s, where you can't roll 10s on a D10 dice, believe it or not, because as I say, the 0 is a 0, not a 10. But you can still roll, because the default minimum hit is 9. But then it means that when you roll to see how much damage you've done, you suffer -3. So you've got to roll 9s again. So for this unit to open fire on those, they'll hit on. You could use all of them, fire all 10. And in fact, the Americans need to do that anyway, because these guys aren't going to be here long, I don't think. So you might as well get the best out of them that you can while they're still there. But if you fire on those, the likelihood of rolling 9s and then 9s again to do any damage are pretty unlikely. So they're going to open fire on these here, which are just in range. Well, they're well in range, but they're just the front rank are within 12 inches. So they'll get a reasonable rate of fire, but the rear rank are just outside, so you have to roll them separately. So the other thing is, now as far as I know, having read the rules, I think I've got this right, but I stand to be corrected if it's wrong. If they were on the edge of this soft cover, there would be no negatives for them. The fact is they're further back, and their firepower is going over 3 inches of this cover. So in fact, it will mean these will have a bit of an advantage. Instead of hitting on 7s, they'll only be hitting on 8s. And this rear rank, because it's long range, will be hitting on 9s. So it's unfortunate, but if they're a little bit further forward, they wouldn't have that problem, but they're not. So in fact, the long range is -2. So these front 5, I'll roll those first, because they're firing over their own terrain. In fact, one guy isn't. In fact, possibly 2. Let's leave those 2 out. They're not covering more than 3 inches of soft cover. So they'll be hitting on 7s. Let's do those 2 first. Yeah, 1 hit. Then we'll do the other 3 on the front rank that are just firing at the normal. Well, they've got this 3 inches of now they're going to hit on 8s. No, there's no hits there. So we've got 1 hit so far. And all of this rear rank, and not only they're at long range, but they're also shooting across 3 inches of cover. So instead of hitting on 7s, it goes to 8, 9, 10. So they're going to have to hit on 9s. Let's see if we get any 9s. No, we didn't. Now, had we got a 9, then we'd have to roll it again to see whether it was actually any damage or not. So all that shooting, that unit, didn't do very well. It only got 1 hit. They're not that effective, are they? But you need to maybe get back to me on this cover thing, because that's the way I read it. Even if the target you're firing at isn't in cover, if you're firing over 3 inches of soft cover, then they still get that bonus, that benefit. I may have got that wrong, but I'll stand to be corrected. Now let's just see whether the unit that the one hit that we got, which from a musket damages at over under 12 inches, is 4s and over. So let's just see whether we do. Yes, we do. So there's 1 casualty on that unit, which means it must do a test. I hope I don't roll another 0. Wouldn't it be amazing if I do? No, we rolled a 7 this time, which is much better. Let me see what the modifiers are though. There's an officer within 6 inches, so to get +1 for that, so that negates, that becomes an 8 in other words. The unit comprises of at least 10 figures. No, it's now down to 8, so it's only +1, so it's now 9. Well, it's going to be well okay, because they're trained infantry, and anything 7 and over is no effect, so that unit is fine. These are fired, so they've got 2 fire markers and some smoke as well, and unfortunately they didn't do a lot of damage. They did cause 1 casualty, but I think they were rather hoping for more than that. Right, the next thing that happens is the provincials use their card to move up a bit nearer to where all the action is, and then they drew 3 more cards. The British, I've just dealt their 3 new cards as well, but out came the last of the clock cards, which means all the cards are reshuffled and put back into the pack. So we're effectively doing part 2 of the game now, of 4. But the cards that are already out on the table do stay there, okay? But I'm just now shuffling the pack so that all the cards that have been discarded for one reason or other are now all mixed up. Now you notice the British, I went to deal them 3 cards, but then the clock card came out, so that's been discarded. They need 1 more card, which I'll deal now. It's been a bit unkind to the British. They've got all blue cards, so they're going to be really restricted this time. Oddly enough, the Americans have got 1 blue and 2 red, so they're going to be letting the British move in a minute as well. So yeah, that's part of the game. It's interesting how this works out. The British, of course, have got 3 command points, so they can maybe do something else with one of their moves. The Americans have only got 1, but they're going to gain 2 in a minute from using these 2 cards. The British will gain 3 more. So although it's a penalty for the British to use a blue card, they do get another command point, which can be used for various things. The command points that you use, or these command abilities, these 3 tokens here, I'll read through the different things you can do with those. The first one is an ability that allows you your force to perform a vigilance action. A vigilance where you can prepare a unit to do something in the opposing person's turn. I haven't done that yet in this game, but we'll cover it when that happens. That only costs 1 of these. Another one, again another single one, the ability allows your faction to take one of your faction's troop cards from your hand and place it face down next to your pool of command points. So put it there like that. And while this card is face down, it can be played as though it were in your hand, but it does not count as being in your hand when determining when you can draw cards. So you could spend the point in, if you've got a blue card and you didn't want to use it, you could put it there. It would cost a point to do so, but it's not used, and you can still draw 3 new cards. So you can basically delay doing something if you wish, which is quite handy. This ability, yeah, it's always good to ensure you have the right cards at the key moment. And you can only hold one card at a time. And if you decide to use that card or replace that card, it's simply discarded without being resolved. Oh right, so if you decide to replace your card, so you can just discard it. And it stays there if the pack is reshuffled as well. So if it's a good card you don't want the enemy to use, you can leave it there for a long time by using that 1 point. That's quite handy actually. Right, Stand Fast is the one that takes 3 points. And this ability allows you automatically to rally a unit in a flight. So if you've got a unit that's running off, you can rally it straight away. Each figure in the rallying unit can immediately turn to face the direction of the choice, but cannot move, and remove the flight marker from the unit straight away. So that's quite handy as well. And then you can do a basic order. I'll come back to that one in a minute actually. The preparation takes 4, which I haven't got anyway, and that ability lets you choose one of your faction's troop cards from the discard pile. So if you used a card that's been really good, you want to get that back again, you can bring it back with 4 of those points. And this can mean you'd have more than 3 cards in your hand. So if there was a card in the discard pile I wanted to use again, I could bring it back if I had 4 command points. I haven't. So the last one is Order. It depends on the size of the unit. It's 2 points for a unit of 7 figures or less, 3 for a unit of 8 to 11 figures, and if you've got 4 there, 12 figures or over. And that means this ability allows you to resolve an action with a unit under your command. The cost of this ability depends on the number of figures in a unit. So that's what these are used for. So once you've got a load of these, they can be used instead of these cards. And if you've got bad cards that you don't want to use, then you can use these instead. So I just thought I'd explain that. It's a little bit complex, but it does seem to work quite well. So once the cards have been used in the pack 4 times, once the 3 clock faces come out 3 times and that card pack is then reshuffled, you do that 4 times, then the game's over. So let's review what's happened in the very first sort of session, if you like. The British have moved up over here and are in quite a nice position to cause serious damage to the unit of militia in that marsh. They haven't done so yet, but I'm sure it won't be long. The provincials have moved up the field and are now getting to a position where they might be able to start shooting. This unit can go in here, but it doesn't get the bonuses for being in a close formation if it does that. But it might have no option because there's not room to get another one in, unless these shuffle over a bit. We'll have to see how that pans out. And over here, the skirmishers are now in not a very good position because they can't do anything. They've shot once and managed to get 2 casualties, but doesn't look like they're going to do much else until they move. They've also got to reload once more anyway. So I would say the British at the moment have got the advantage because they've seen off a unit of militia completely. The other militia in the area over there, the swamp area, or marsh area, are looking a bit dodgy. So at the moment I would say it's more of an advantage to the British. But let's just see what happens in part 2.